The stars over the desert sky of Mer-5 were always silent, but tonight they cracked with fire. It started with a scream across the combs. A human mining vessel had been vaporized mid-transit, and no one knew why. No warnings, no demands. Just silence and then ash. The humans called it an act of war. But the enemy had no name. The Galactic Union ordered retaliation. Troops were deployed to the sand-covered ruins of ancient civilizations. And among those ancient towers, carved with forgotten language, lived beings that did not welcome war. They did not fight. They only watched. They were called the Solari, and among them lived a priestess untouched by time. She was called Virelia. Her skin glowed green beneath the golden sun. Her robe flowed like melted silk, hiding the shape of a body worshipped by her people, but never touched. For 1,000 years, no one had dared. It was sacred law. Her body was the temple of stars. Her vow unbreakable, but something stirred when the first human squad entered the sacred city of Serathun. Their boots crushed sand that had not been stepped on for centuries. Their weapons hummed with nervous fingers. One of them, a soldier named Corvan, locked eyes with her across the dust. He didn't know who she was. He only saw a woman, not a symbol. She looked at him not as an intruder, but as something different. Curious, unexpected, alive. He wasn't the captain. He wasn't a diplomat. He wasn't special. But his presence seemed to shake something inside her. Something old. Something buried beneath silence and rules. When they tried to set up scanners, the ground cracked. Sand exploded into violent waves. Ancient energy pulsed through the temple floor. The Solari warned them to leave, but it was too late. Whatever. Force protected the city had awakened. Virelia stepped forward. Her voice was calm but heavy. She told them they had broken sacred space, and yet her eyes never left Corvan. While others shouted or ran, he stood still, unmoving, watching her with something more than fear. Something closer to wonder. That night, the temple glowed from within. Flames danced above the towers, but no fire touched the city. The priestess stood at the center of it all, arms open to the sky. She called to the stars in a language old and powerful. And in that moment, Corvan took a single step forward. No one saw it coming. A pulse hit the human soldiers, knocking most of them to the ground. But Corvan didn't fall. Virelia's eyes widened. Her glow dimmed. She whispered a word no one understood. And when her hand reached out toward him, the city trembled again. The Solari gasped. She was breaking the vow. A vow untouched for 1,000 years. Her hand brushed his face. A single touch. The sky shifted color. The desert winds stopped. The very planet held its breath. Corvan didn't move. He couldn't. He didn't understand why her touch felt like fire and ice. Why it filled him with weight and light at the same time. She closed her eyes. And the vow was broken. In the far distance, a blast broke the horizon. A new enemy was coming, one the humans had never seen. But Virelia no longer looked afraid. She looked reborn. The war had begun. But something deeper had awakened beneath. The stars. Something far more dangerous than war. A forbidden bond between human and goddess had been formed. And the galaxy would never be the same. Asterisk Corvan sat inside a sealed tent while guards argued outside. They didn't know what to do with him. A soldier who had touched the untouchable. Some wanted him executed. Others said he had been chosen. He didn't speak. He only remembered the heat of her hand against his face. The moment replayed in his head again and again like a dream he couldn't shake. Outside, the wind howled against the domes of the human outpost. The desert had grown colder. Something was wrong with the planet's energy. Machines kept shorting out. Lights flickered. Batteries drained for no reason. Commander Reese stormed in and grabbed Corvan by the collar. He shouted questions Corvan couldn't answer. Did he provoke her? Did he activate some alien trap? Why did the sand quake only when he stood near her? Corvin said nothing. Later that night, a Solari elder walked through the human barricade. No one stopped him. His robe glowed faintly under the moon. He asked for Corvin by name. That was the first time the humans heard the priestess had spoken his name aloud. Corvin followed the elder into the ruins. The guards refused to come along. The desert was too strange, the silence too loud. The elder said little. Only that Virelia had called him, and the call could not be denied. The temple had changed. It pulsed like a living thing. Vines of glowing crystal had grown over its outer walls. Symbols shimmered in the air without being carved. The inside was warm, golden, full of floating lights that hummed softly in circles around her throne. Virelia stood in the center. Her hood was removed. Her red hair burned like flame. Her eyes locked onto his the moment he entered. The guards outside could not see this. They would never be allowed this far in. She stepped down, slow and deliberate. Her voice was music and thunder. She said the vow had protected the galaxy, but it had also imprisoned her. Her people believed touch would awaken chaos. Now chaos had already arrived. She told him something ancient stirred beneath the sands. It fed on purity, on restraint, on rules never broken. By touching her, he had awakened a different force. One that feared nothing and would now rise. Corvin said he didn't mean to do anything. He only wanted to understand. She smiled. A soft smile that reached deeper than words. She said that was the difference. Others feared her touch. He accepted it. She raised her hand again. This time he took it without hesitation. The moment their palms met, the floor beneath them shimmered. A column of light rose from the center of the temple. Energy surged through the pillars and shot into the sky. In orbit, human ships detected the surge. So did the enemy fleet. The signal was ancient and loud. Something from before the first stars were born. A beacon meant to wake something older than time. The Solari elders bowed in silence. They had waited for this. 1,000 years of stillness had led to this moment. Virelia looked at Corvin and said she would not turn back now. The galaxy was watching. And the war had just changed shape. No one would believe it started with a single touch. Asterisk. The signal from the temple reached across 5-star systems before it stopped. Fleets paused. Satellites failed. Communications broke apart. Somewhere in the black silence, the old enemy stirred. It was not a species. It was a hunger shaped into form. The ancient Solari had warned about it in songs whispered under stone. They called it the Void Choir, a race that devoured voices, light, and warmth. Once long ago, the Solari defeated them by binding their own priestesses in vows of stillness. No touch, no emotion, no union. That was the price of safety. But now one priestess had touched a man. And the barrier had cracked. Virelia knew this. Truth as she walked with Corvin beneath the temple. The deeper chambers pulsed with power. Glyphs lit under their steps. His presence was altering the temple's nature. Her voice trembled as she explained the truth. She had not chosen him. The temple had. The energy between them was not just personal. It was biological. His DNA matched ancient codes in the temple walls. A forgotten prophecy had spoken of a warm-blooded stranger from the stars. A being not bound by their cycles. A being who would end the silence. Corvin was stunned. He didn't feel like a chosen one. He was just a soldier. A man who followed orders. But in this moment, her hand in his, he felt more than human. He felt seen. Outside, the desert cracked. Again. Something rose beneath the sands. Huge stone discs turned like gears buried in dust. The sky changed color. Stars blinked out. Ships in orbit screamed warnings into static. Virelia led him to a chamber shaped like a sphere. Its walls reflected. Not light, but thought. His memories danced across them. His past, his pain, his kindness. She touched one vision. It showed him saving a wounded creature on a battlefield. She said this was why the temple accepted him. He reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. Her breath slowed. She whispered that her vow had always been a cage. Her people mistook sacrifice for safety. But safety had never brought them peace. It had only made them silent. Corvin asked her what came next. She said the union must be completed. Not in body, but in spirit. A binding ritual. A merging of purpose. His humanity with her divinity. Only together could they close the door that had been unlocked. The chamber shook. Lights turned red. The void choir was coming faster now. Something had accelerated their awakening. The temple was no longer a refuge. It was a target. She stepped into the center of the sphere and called him forward. She placed her hand over his chest and whispered a vow in her tongue. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the feeling. He repeated her words, slowly, carefully. As he spoke, the walls of the chamber began to spin. Their feet rose from the ground. Light formed around them like armor. And in that instant, their minds touched. He saw her childhood, her loneliness, the years of isolation, the silence of ceremony, the fear of breaking her promise. She saw his wars, his lost friends, his kindness in chaos, his deep wish for meaning beyond orders. When the ritual ended, they fell to the floor, breathing hard. Changed, the priestess had broken her vow, and now she was no longer just a guardian. She was something new. And Corvin was no longer just a soldier. The war had shifted again. This time, the galaxy would feel it. The stars above Mer 5 were now filled with shadows. Enemy ships appeared like holes torn in space. They made no sound. They had no lights. They didn't broadcast warnings or signals. They simply moved forward like a wave of night ready to swallow everything. Human fleets scrambled to form a line. Commanders shouted orders. Pilots locked into their cockpits. Missiles were armed, but none of it would matter. The Void Choir did not fight with weapons. They fought with fear. Inside the temple, Varelia stood with Corvin before the central altar. Her robes now shimmered with threads of light. She had changed. Her aura pulsed. Her power was no longer hidden. The ritual had awakened something forgotten. She looked at Corvin and said the time had come to speak not with words, but with light. The temple could channel their bond. It could send a message across space. Not just to enemies, but to every living being. Corvin nodded. He didn't understand the full meaning, but he trusted her. That trust was the bond that made the temple respond. Energy climbed the walls. Pillars hummed. The ceiling opened like a blooming flower and revealed the sky above. Varelia held Corvin's hands and lifted her voice. A song rose. Not music, but emotion shaped into sound. The temple carried it, broadcast it, pushed it into space. The message struck the Void Choir like a pulse of fire. Ships trembled. Shadows peeled away. The creatures screamed without mouths. The purity of the bond repelled them. Their hunger could not feed on unity. They fed on silence, shame, and fear. But not this. On the planet's surface, Solari elders wept. They had never heard the voice of a priestess rise in freedom. The vow had muted them for 1,000 years. Now one of their own had broken it, and the stars were listening. Human commanders received strange readings. Energy levels spiked. Systems rebooted. Broken satellites sparked back to life. It was as if the planet itself was waking up. But it wasn't enough. The Void Choir began reshaping themselves. They shed their shadowy forms and took shape as burning figures, creatures of pain and memory. They had evolved. And now they moved toward the planet with one goal: destroy this source of light. Varelia fell to her knees. The effort had drained her. Corvin caught her before she collapsed. She whispered that the bond had one final phase. A joining of breath and will. A final leap that required full surrender. He asked what would happen if they failed. She said nothing. Her eyes simply closed as if trusting him to decide. Corvan carried her toward the altar. The temple shifted. Walls bent to open a path. Energy flowed into his chest. Symbols burned along his arms. He didn't feel pain. Only weight. Like holding an entire world in his hands. He placed her at the center of the altar. Light covered her body like silk. The temple spoke in a voice older than stars. It asked one question. Do you give yourself? Corvan said yes. Asterisk. The altar lit up with fireless light. Every stone in the temple glowed. The wind outside fell still. The stars above blinked, holding their breath. Corvan stood in the center, the light moving through him like veins of heat and memory. Varelia opened her eyes. She no longer looked tired. Her face was calm. Her hair floated as if underwater. She reached out her hand and took his without hesitation. The temple responded instantly. The walls shifted. Floors rotated into spiral patterns. The dome above became transparent. From within, they could see the void choir descending like living storms. Yet Corvan felt no fear. The voice of the temple spoke again. It called them the bonded, not warrior and priestess. Not human and alien, but two souls fused by choice. The sky cracked. A beam of darkness shot from the lead enemy ship. It struck the shield above the city and shattered it like glass. Alarms rang across the human outpost. Officers screamed into broken radios. The defense was down. Corvan stepped forward. His body now shimmered with threads of gold and white. The energy of the bond filled him. He turned to Varelia. She nodded. No words were needed. They walked side by side to the outer circle. The final chamber had no floor. It hovered above space. A place where matter and spirit touched. The choir arrived above them in full form. Creatures of shadow wrapped in light. They did not own. Varelia raised both hands. Her body pulsed with memory. 1,000 years of restraint, suffering, and silence poured out in one wave. The void choir screamed. Their forms cracked. But it was not enough. Corvan shouted her name. She faltered. The light began to flicker. The ritual had one weakness. It required balance. And she had poured too much. He stepped behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. Energy surged between them. Two hearts beating in rhythm. His breath slowed to match hers. Her glow brightened. The bond sealed. The temple released its core. A spear of light pierced the heavens. It struck the largest choir vessel and split it in half. The sky turned blue again. The stars returned. The darkness recoiled. Ships screamed and twisted as they fell into themselves. The remaining choir retreated, not defeated but broken. They would not return soon. The light in the temple dimmed. The wind returned to the desert. Corvan fell to his knees, breath heavy. Varelia knelt beside him. Her voice was soft. She said he had given more than he knew. He smiled and told her it was worth it. Outside, the Solari gathered and bowed. For the first time in 1,000 years, their priestess had not only broken the vow, she had saved them with it, and beside her stood the human who changed everything with a single touch. Asterisk days passed after the battle in the skies. Above Mer 5 remained clear. No shadows returned. No choir ships reappeared. But everyone knew this peace was temporary. The enemy was not destroyed, only driven away. The real victory had happened inside the temple. Corvan rested under the shade of a crystal archway. His skin still shimmered. Faintly, energy moved under it like soft currents. He had not been the same since the bond. He felt everything more deeply. Sounds were clearer. Emotions sharper. Varelia stood nearby, speaking with the elders. Her tone had changed. She no longer whispered. She spoke with authority and heart. Her vow had been broken, but something greater had been born in its place. The Solari Council approached Corvan later that evening. They bowed and offered him a mark of honor. A circle carved in silver. It was once reserved only for the dead. For those who gave everything. He asked why they honored him this way. The eldest replied that it was because he had touched not just their priestess, but their future. Corvin walked with Varelia into the outer gardens. The sky was dark, but peaceful. Stars flickered with life. She asked him if he missed Earth. He paused before answering. Then said he no longer knew where home was. Not since he met her, she smiled. A soft, real smile that no longer carried duty. Only truth. She reached out her hand and he took it without hesitation. No temple, no ritual. Just two people under the sun. Same sky. The bond still pulsed within them. It was quieter now, but it lived. It was part of them. A thread tying soul to soul. She said the galaxy would fear that kind of union. Because it could not be controlled, the humans began preparing to leave the planet. Their mission had ended. Reports were written. Data collected. But none of it could explain what really happened in the heart of the temple. Corvan was offered a return flight. A hero's welcome, a medal, but he declined. He said his place was now among the Solari, not for glory, but for her. Varelia placed her hand on his chest and said he had already given enough. But he said quietly that giving wasn't the same as leaving. He wanted to stay because he chose to, not because he had to. The decision was made under the stars. No grand speech. Number. Council vote. Just a human and a priestess choosing to walk forward together. In the temple, the lights shifted to a new color. One the Solari had never seen before. They called it the color of becoming. And with that, the bond was sealed beyond ritual. Asterisk. The temple stood quiet under the twin moons of Mer 5. Its walls no longer glowed with urgent warnings. The energy had settled. The planet had exhaled. Yet something had changed forever in its core. The bond was now part of its design. Etched into every stone. Woven into every whisper of wind. Varelia walked beside Corvan through the halls of the sanctuary. Where once silence ruled, now laughter echoed. Solari children played without fear. The elders moved without cloaks. The vow that once held their people in chains was now nothing but memory. The humans had left orbit weeks ago. A peace treaty had been signed between Earth and the Solari. Not just papers and signatures, but promises carved in stone. Corvan's name was written into their history. Not as a soldier, but as a bridge. Varelia entered the sacred chamber once again. Not to pray, not to perform a ritual, but to look at the place where her vow had broken. She traced her fingers across the stone that once held her fate. It felt warmer now. Lighter. Corvan stood at the entrance, watching her in silence. He knew. She still carried the weight of her people's history. She was not just a woman. She was a symbol rebuilt from ruins. But she had chosen to be more than a symbol. She turned and smiled at him. A smile free of burden. She said the galaxy would come again with fear and war. But when that time came, they would face it not as priestess and warrior, but as two souls forever bound. The stars above began to shift, not from war, but from renewal. The temple sent out a pulse, not of warning, but of invitation. A call to others who lived in silence, who feared breaking their own ancient chains. The signal traveled far, across sectors, through forgotten relay towers, into places where life hid in the shadows. And everywhere it reached, the message was the same. You are not alone. Corvan placed his hand on Varelia's shoulder. She leaned into him with trust. No ceremony, no light. Just the quiet peace of belonging. In time, new visitors arrived on Mer 5. Pilgrims, scholars, curious beings of all shapes and colors. They did not come to worship. They came to learn how silence was broken, how love had rewritten law. Corvan and Varelia stood at the temple gates to welcome them, not as leaders, not as legends, But as the first to choose light over tradition, the vow was broken, but in its place stood something stronger, a future built by choice.